My name is John Robert Lee. I'm St. Lucian. I'm speaking to you from St. Lucia now.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode.
Lived here most of my life and worked here. What can I say about myself? I received my early education here in St. Lucia, primary school education, secondary school education. I went to university at the University of the West Indies in Barbados, Cave Hill, and also at Mona, Jamaica. And I got degrees I did a sort of general degree, English and French literature, history, sociology, and so on. I have been very involved in theater, certainly creative writing, media. I've been a broadcaster, radio and television. I like the interview format. My sort of main profession, after I taught for a number of years and did radio for a number of years, my main profession has been librarianship, which I found a very good profession for a writer. It gave me enough room to write. I've edited books. I've published poetry, short stories, reviews, prose. I'm also very involved with the Christian faith. I'm a Baptist elder and preacher and teacher for many years, almost 40 years I've been doing this. So I'm very involved with the Christian faith. Maybe just a quick note, my Christian faith, I certainly have no interest in a kind of dogmatic, theocratic kind of faith that's happening in the United States these days. I believe in liberal democracy. I think people should be free to make their own choice about whatever they want to make. I certainly don't try to impose my faith on anybody. My biblical Christian faith informs my writing and what I do. But I say everyone has a right to choose to believe and not believe whatever they want to believe, any religion they want, whatever. I mention this because my faith is important to me. But as I say, I don't make any big dogmatic show of it. At present, I'm retired now from my library job. I live and work at home, and my work's mainly doing writing, reviewing. I just had a new book accepted by my publisher in the United Kingdom, People Tree Press, called Belmont Portfolio. And even as you spoke to me, as I was preparing for this interview, I'm working on a new manuscript called After Poem Psalms. But there again, I'm applying, if you're on my biblical Christian view, very much to the world. What's happening in the States with the whole Trump thing going on there, the autocracies, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the cities of our world, all the sort of increasing crime and violence and discriminations. And certainly my poems speak against racism as a black man. You know, at home in St. Lucia, I'm sure you know this too. I have a name. When I get on a plane to go to the United Kingdom or US, I become a black man. And certainly, as someone who came under colonialism in my growing-up years, I'm aware of the ills of colonialism and all that's been done. Being a British colonial like yourself, I believe Nigerian, you have known, I guess, maybe British colonialism. So I bring my faith and my thinking to bear onto all these things. I don't live in a sort of bubble and ignore discrimination, George Floyd, what's happening now with your Trump movement in America, in fact, all over the world, in Italy where you are, the whole rise of the far right everywhere. So I think as a writer, I must be aware and conscious of these things. And these things are dealt with in my poetry, in my writing, you see? But again, I do it in such a way that I'm not imposing any kind of view on anybody, but I hold my position with my own, if you want, theological, philosophical kind of viewpoint from where I sit in the Caribbean, as a Caribbean man, Caribbean writer, with our own views here in the Caribbean, but looking out from the Caribbean into the wider world. And we are certainly part of the wider world. So in a nutshell, that sort of sums up where I'm coming from. I hope I've given you and your viewers a bit of an idea of my own sort of point of view, as it were, of these things. Liberal democracy, in its political kind of view, religious reform theology in terms of Christian theology. But again, I say even there, I have no interest I'm interested in church history and Christian history, history of other religions, Also, I'm interested in what other religions have to say. But I have no interest in any kind of dogmatic attacking or whatever other people. Everyone is free to hold whatever views they want on anything, as long as they allow me, obey, room to hold my own view. That's why I say I believe in liberal democracy. You hold your own view, I have mine. We don't quarrel. If anybody wants to quarrel, they'll quarrel with themselves. I just walk away and leave it at that. I'm a man of peace.
I love that.
Right.
I really love that. Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
If that is how religion has been functioning, it would really have been a beautiful thing. But anyway, I promise we're not going into religion today, except maybe
So I just
you
mentioned
choose
this background. Yes.
Yeah, except you choose to, because it's not something that we ignore here, because here we are free to talk about anything as long as it concerns us.
Yes.
We are Africans, we are descendants of
Yes.
Africa. As long as it concerns Africa, we talk about it.
Yes, absolutely.
That is our right.
And I certainly consider myself part of the African diaspora. I mean, in the
Absolutely.
Caribbean, we're mixed. My mother's grandmother was a Kalinago Carib from the island of Dominica. I'm sure there's European in my blood. Even my surname Lee probably comes from England. And of course, I have African ancestry. So I represent the Caribbean in many ways because of of all the mixes of blood within me. But of course, I stand on the world stage as a black man because the world sees me. I see myself a Caribbean man. But the world, once I step into Europe or UK or USA, I'm a black man fine. And I certainly identify with the African diaspora. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a member of African diaspora, I'm interested in knowing a bit about your background. I know you already explained it, but I'm going to trace that a little bit more. Tell me a bit about you as you were growing up in St. Lucius. I'm interested in that story.
Well, what can I say? I'm 74, which gives you some idea of my generation. So when I was born and grew up in St. Lucia, born in 1948, through my early years until about the mid-60s, we were a British colony under Britain. So a lot of my influences, even in literature, come from English literature, British, I guess the British influence would have influenced me. In 1967, my country achieved something called associated statehood, where Britain became responsible only for our external affairs, but we ran our own matters with our own flag and our own anthem. In 1979, we became fully independent. We are a member of the Commonwealth, and the Queen gone now, and the King is our head of state. I certainly believe in the Republic. I think we should no longer have the King of Britain as our head of state. Doesn't make any sense to me as an independent nation. I think the Commonwealth is a good idea. Many people are against the Commonwealth now. If, as former members of the Commonwealth, we can share ideas, sports, arts and culture, whatever, together, Africa, India, the Caribbean together, because we were once together as colonies of Britain, I have no problem with that. But I don't think we should have the King of England as the head of my state. I believe in the Republican status with our own president as our head of state. So I grew up under British colonial government until the mid-60s. And therefore, I would have been very influenced by British colonial, but certainly I speak English language, as you can hear, even though in St. Lucia, which also had the French colonial background for many years, till about 1804. We were under French and British, and we are a French Creole country like Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe. And I speak a French Creole also, so I'm bilingual. I speak English, but we also had the influence of the French. And therefore, I would say in many ways, we are a French Creole country. Nous parlons Creole. We speak Creole, a French Creole, I say like Haiti and so on. And so that is also part of my own cultural and historical background, not just the British. So I grew up in a country with, yes, British English influences. My father was Anglican, my mother was Catholic. I went to Anglican schools, I went to a Catholic secondary school. And so those things are part of the influence, the British literary traditions and so on, historical traditions, but the French Creole. And those things have fed into my writing. But of course, growing up in the 60s and certainly 70s, American influence was never far away. After the Second World War, many Caribbean people looked to America as a place to go to. And because America had almost come into the Second World War and helped to win the Second World War, certainly my parents' generation looked to America as a great place. And certainly we too looked to America. But from about the 70s, 80s, we had what I would call a cultural political revolution renaissance in the Caribbean, where we became more aware of each other. Reggae music, Rastafari, of which I was part for a while, the soca music from Trinidad and Tobago, and these political movements of democratic socialism in the Caribbean, the Black Power movement from America. And so in the 70s, I'm part of a generation which are probably a new Caribbean generation that saw independence come in with all the optimism of independence. And then the post-independence years, in a sense, where we are now, where we began to use our own nation languages, not just the English language, but as Kamau Brathwaite famously described them, we speak our own vernaculars. My French Creole, my own St. Lucian version of English, Jamaican Trinidadian. And for us in my generation, those things became prominent and dominant to my generation. And they still have a tremendous influence on me in terms of my thinking, my writing, a certain kind of quote-unquote radical liberal view of where we are, certainly post-colonial, anti-colonial, certainly, but post-colonial, wanting to define ourselves, for ourselves, who we are as Caribbean people in the world, becoming more aware through movements like Rastafari of our African heritage. Because before that, as you know, the African heritage was despised and rejected, and the British tradition had to put it down. And many people in the Caribbean had no interest in the African traditions, in the African background. And so my generation was among those people like Walter Rodney, Kamau Brathwaite in literature, that led us back to rediscover our African roots, our African heritage. I think that even today in 2022, we need to forge deeper links with the African continent, with Africa today. Don't just live with some mythical, romantic view of Africa in the past. We need to find Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa today and travel more to them, have them come to visit us, build up business links with them. Do not depend so much on the West as is still happening. So I'm very much part of that generation, the revolutionary generation, radical generation. So people like Bob Marley and Rastafari, democratic socialism, and those movements shaped me. And movements in literature, Derek Walcott, who's from my own country, St. Lucia, and Kamau Brathwaite, and these people in literature and culture helped to shape the thinking of my own generation.
Thank you so much for that.
You know, my coming into my early manhood, and have made me the kind of man that I am. And I speak not only for myself, but for, if you want, the generation of people around me, not only in St. Lucia, but in the Caribbean. And that kind of very generally describes us, I believe, and what we came out of.
Thank you so much for that, dear John. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
You see, before we started to talk just now,
Yes.
I told you that we are not in haste here.
Yes.
So we do take time
Fine.
at our service. So we just say what we have to say because we are not in haste. So I can guarantee you that everything that you have laid out, if we were ready to look at them, because I consider all of them very important, valid for our demography, for our people. But we need to talk about these things, and you will see that by the time we spend 1 hour, 30 minutes, we are just barely starting.
Understood.
All right, let's leave that aside. We'll consider.
We will go as far as we can. Let's look at 12. If we need to go a bit over 12, we'll do that.
You did make mention of Commonwealth, and of course, at the death of Queen Elizabeth II, I think the people were already raising some questions about the Commonwealth. I'm still trying to even understand that, why it's still vital, why it's still important for Africans today. Because if, for example, the British at the time, let me use your words, despise Africa so that they, their own culture can reign supreme over the African people, over the people that they colonized.
Exactly. Enslaved.
At a point.
They enslaved and colonized and discriminated against.
Yeah. And at a point,
at
a point, these people it appeared to them that they are free. They are not really free as it were, because that will need to be explained what is even meant by freedom.
Indeed.
Because now, what does it really mean, the Commonwealth? Is it to hold the former empire of Britain? All of us are subject to the British monarch, where we are not really, by we, I mean people of African descent or people that have been colonized by the British power are not really free. They're not really here. Otherwise, what I want to happen is that the Oba of Benin, because I'm coming from Edo State, our royal monarch, our royal family, or the biggest ruler in our land is the Oba of Benin. I want to hold the Queen of England in the same height as the Oba of Benin. I don't want to have the Oba of Benin under the Queen of England.
Yes.
For me, I don't want to take that. If that is how we structure the Commonwealth,
Yes.
maybe it might make sense. But if it is a kind of a resemblance of the former colony, that all of us, we are subject to the British monarch,
Yes.
where the British monarch is the real ruler, every other person is just a subordinate, then I think I have a problem with the Commonwealth. That is where I think I want you to speak on a little bit. 2022, what does Commonwealth mean for the African people?
Let me answer this. Since you're speaking to me also as a poet, I will come back to what you've asked. Let me read a poem for you about what you've just asked me.
Please go.
It's from a new manuscript which I'm working on called After Poem Psalms. And it was written since the Queen died. That should give you a hint of what's coming. It's not long, so I will read it for you. The BBC man intoned with Big Ben tolling, that metronome of grief. Pews circled in rectangular vigils about the rosemary, myrtle, and oak wreath. Families shifted under the gossiping gazing of the world gathering across streets and screens to see the back of the retreating piper shutting this Elizabethan age. Why do the nations rage? Commonwealth of the once enslaved, the massacred, boot-trampled colonies of this empire, enriched by pirates, arrogant armies, hanging governors, fat bishops. Make reparation, they say to the barons. Apologize, they write to the king. To our royalty and citizens below the Atlantic. Our children without memory want rest. How long will Europe and their kind hate our skin and the people plot a vain thing? They made the white man a counterfeit Christ, whiteness their religion and manifesto, spread the mind-destroying disease of colonialism, plundered God's rich earth and his colored peoples under the red, white, and blue of that unholy triad. But the king with hair like wool, himself, the one on the rainbow throne, just and holy, the anointed, whose promises are certain, who sees all things, against whose majesty the kings of the earth set themselves. He knows his own, the oppressed of the earth, and he will deliver in his appointed time. Even now the wand is broken, crown removed, orb and scepter laid down at the feet of the Most High. Let him who have eyes see. The Commonwealth starting to scatter. Let the people of Jah go out of Babylon, flee Sodom and Gomorrah, abandon Egypt. Let revelations be opened again by the prophets, and the rulers take counsel together. That's my take on what happened.
Thank you for that sharing. Please go.
Okay. I think in a sense, if the Commonwealth can be reviewed, reformed, and the Commonwealth can say, okay, we want shared, if you want, British colonial rule, whatever, but we are now all independent. And we want to move on. We don't want the monarch of Britain to be our head. We want to choose our own head. We want to get together to decide what we do together in terms of trade, exchanges, culture and the arts, sports, and so on. If we decide we want the king to come to our meetings and sit with us, fine. But if the Commonwealth decide we no longer want the king of Britain at all among us, then it's up for them to decide, and the king of Britain has to accept that. But I think the fact that the Commonwealth of Nations can already get together in some way to talk and meet, I think that's a good thing. It's what we do with it. But I think we do have to move on from the fact of the monarch of Britain still in some way having that important place. So I know people who are not in favor of the Commonwealth at all. And if the Commonwealth dissolves and disintegrates, well, okay, that's a choice of the Commonwealth to decide. But I think we should find a way to somehow work together, stay together, and do things together, like our Commonwealth Games, Commonwealth Arts and Culture, trade and industry and exchanges and travel among each other and get to know each other better, because we do share the English language. We do share a common background of colonial history from which we have now become independent. So that's my take, Obehi, on that matter of the Commonwealth. I'm open to whatever is decided down the lines. But I think there's something we can work with it. We need to transform it to suit ourselves. And the monarch of Britain should not have to decide for us where we go. If we want to get, if you, Nigeria, St. Lucia, the Caribbean, India want to get together, we can decide whether we invite him or not to come. He doesn't have to be there. You see what I'm saying?
You see, where I really have a problem with it is,
Uh-huh.
you know, when you create institution,
Yeah.
you also create sort of emblems, symbolism of
Fair
it,
enough.
you know, what it represents. Now, in this case, the Commonwealth is what we are talking about. What does it represent? It represents the glory of the British Empire,
Okay.
and therefore the defeat of every other person that was subjugated.
Mm-hmm.
So, what am I to celebrate in the Commonwealth as
Okay.
a member that was subjugated? I would need to invite the British to my territory.
Mm-hmm.
They came by force,
Yeah.
killed my people,
Mm-hmm.
imposed themselves on my ancestors.
Right.
On their own, they went away. Maybe they could have been fought and driven away, but we didn't do that. Maybe we were not able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can get it. They won. They won. Fine. But
Right.
what do we need to celebrate in that? If what we're actually celebrating is that we had a common history,
Yes.
that history certainly do not put us in equal ranking.
Yes.
That is where I think we have a problem there. If maybe, for example, it was all the people that was formerly colony of the British have organized themselves and called themselves Commonwealth, I can get that. But certainly must not include the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Because in this case, they would have been the enemy of this, because they have been the aggressor of what eventually became independence.
Mm-hmm.
How can they still become the head of that organ? That is where I think we need explanation.
I agree. So it may mean, as people talk about this more, that either the nations either totally rename themselves, don't even call themselves the Commonwealth, don't even use the word Commonwealth. Just say we want to have an association of nations, figure out how we want to do it. My point is, how can we stay together? Africa, India, all those nations that once were under Britain. How can we move on past all that as independent nations? I know there's a United Nations, but how do we stay together in a unique way? That's the kind of question I think need to be answered. If the decision is to completely dissolve the Commonwealth, well, fine. But how can we work together better? How can we stay together better? Even the United Nations today has all kinds of problems. And I think we who once shared that common history with all its ills and all the rest of it, what can we salvage? How can Africa and the Caribbean is made up of, yes, you have Europeans, you have Asian people here, but the very cultural spirit of the Caribbean is African. How can we forge deeper links within African. Oh, we can do it without any Commonwealth.
I think certainly, because I don't think we need the Commonwealth to be able to. Because if we are using the Commonwealth, and this Commonwealth has been designed by the British, because they, of
Right.
course, have the power, they have the institution, they
Right.
have the possibility to be able to have institutionalized the
Yes.
idea of the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
It means we are just simply perpetuating the same idea that they had. So
Okay.
it only glorifies one party here, and it glorifies the victor, and we can see who the
Yes.
victor is. So
Yes.
that does not bring actually. Maybe I don't really see any unity there, except maybe a unity or that is say umbrella of the same people, the way they have always wanted it, which is the old empire. But who is the head of this empire?
Right.
So the question needs to be really simple, because if we want to organize the Caribbean and Africa, we
Yes.
don't need the Commonwealth to do
We don't
this.
need, I agree. We don't need.
It's already
Commonwealth for that.
simple. People that were formerly, or the people that are descendants of Africans. So that is already strong.
Exactly. Correct. Agreed. And in fact, when we do that, we go back over the European interventions, and we go
Absolutely.
back. We pass them, and we go back to the original, where our forefathers came from, and we meet our brothers and sisters again without any intermediary of the British. We don't need them, or the Europeans. Remember, there's the French and all the rest of them, and Spanish, and so we don't need them. No, I agree. So I'm saying,
Is the United States part of the? Is the United States part of the Commonwealth?
No. It's not. No, the Commonwealth is a British Commonwealth for us. I don't know if the French have anything similar for their former French colonies. I don't know what the French have, but the British have this Commonwealth idea. But the US is not part of that, not at all. No.
But the US was formerly a colony of the United Kingdom
exactly.
too.
Good. Well, the good point you made. The US, although they were a colony of Britain, they've never considered themselves part of the Commonwealth. But Australia is part of the Commonwealth, and India, New Zealand, and in fact, Australia and New Zealand seem to consider themselves almost a little above all the others, because again, the whole white business, Australia, New Zealand, compared to Nigeria, the Caribbean, and so on. So even within the Commonwealth, you do have these strata, again, race, Australia, New Zealand, and the white business again, compared to us who are African, who are black. And of course, you have the Asians, Indonesia, Singapore, whoever, India, So you have the whole race thing still keeps playing out. But I think it's discussions.
Yeah.
I know people here who are completely against the Commonwealth. There are people who tell you point blank they have no interest in the Commonwealth at all. And if it needs to be dissolved, let it be dissolved. But for my own country, I don't think we should have the king as head of our state. We need to go to Republican status and get our own president of our head of state.
That is what we were saying before, that the independence is not really independence, because if you are free, you organize yourself the way you want it.
Exactly. And I think we have a very progressive government now in my country, and I think they're going to be moving towards that, a step at a time. But some of us are certainly going to be putting the pressure on and write about these things and call for Republican status more and more. In fact, some islands, Barbados recently did that. Guyana, Dominica, Trinidad are already republics. So it's just a matter of time, I think.
Thank you so much for that.
To Republican status,
I appreciate that. All right, now let's talk a bit about your writing.
Right.
Tell us a bit about that. What are you concentrating on? What is the key message that you are trying to pass on in your writing?
I don't know if I have a key message. Whenever I'm asked that, I can never say, well, I have one theme. Over the years, I've written out of my Caribbean experience, out of St. Lucia. The images of my poetry come from St. Lucia and the Caribbean. I describe the fauna and flora quite a bit. And we're an island nation, so I love the sea. So you see seaside images, seagulls, the vegetation, the flowers. The dances and the music are very much in my poetry, the language. But I comment a lot on the politics, the culture, the life around me that I see. I try to make my poems relevant to the immediacy of life today. Even my recent poems will speak of what's happening today, not only in America with Trump and these people, but I'm George Floyd and so on. I speak of these things in my poems. Right, so what's happening in the country, the rising crime and so on, the politics of division and so on, you know. My poems deal with personal matters, some autobiography in there. But as I told you, I'm also a Christian, a practicing Christian. So my faith plays an important part. A lot of what I write, I see through the eyes of faith, through the eyes of my faith. I write about what I see, Christ, the biblical revelations I take them to be. The Bible gives me my world and life view. So I interpret the world around me through biblical Christian teachings, as best as I can, as I understand them. And so those are the kind of things that my poems deal with. Let me read you something from my new book, Belmont Portfolio, and it'll give you a sense of things, of what I've just been talking about. And this comes from Belmont Portfolio Poems, a part 2. And the part 2 has several sections, so this is one of the sections. And the section is titled, What Remains to be Said, Written and Sung. And it kind of sums up perhaps what I've been saying to you here. And I dedicate this section actually to George Lamming, the Barbadian writer who just died earlier this year. What remains to be said, written and sung? We have been to the end of history and back again. We have returned from cities of perfection, come again to narrow lanes of Belmont, sat in the King's Halls of Cambridge, re-entered Marchand, walked with laureates in Boston, Stockholm, Castries, climbed hills of shanties above Fort-de-France, swam in Skeets Bay, drank over late-night fish on Baxter's Road, Bridgetown, laughed with reggae stars and Kaiser kings, strolled pagodas in Tokyo, temples in Kyoto, and prayed in simple pews of village churches. Love has left wrinkled skins of loneliness, children gone to far countries as they must, lovers distracted by diversions of age, and old flames rekindling dead wood. What remains to be sung, made poetry of all those gone so quickly hours? All of it, I guess, that voyage of a life, if you are brave enough to find metaphors of the metaphysical in it, in all the messy stuff, the sacred and sacramental, in certain failures, in bird call insisting, pup saying something to a goat in the yard, compa music coming up the hill, child shrieking somewhere in a house, and so on, all of it there in your present timeline, in your hearing now threading that life and its inebriated days, your weary hunger for affection, for affirmation, the shifty-eyed hope of faith, of redemption, years inevitably winding in their spiral to that moment of the epilogue of your biography. So write it down and say it like a griot, sing it strong like a chanterelle over shack, drums and violon, like Bob Marley still wailing from passing vans over the lost cities of yards.
Literature is always electrifying,
Mm-hmm.
especially poetry.
Yes, indeed. And I
All
try
right,
to
help me
make
understand
it
this.
relevant. Mhm.
How did you start to write? I mean, tell me about why you started to write. What are the things that led you into writing?
Again, when I'm asked that question, that's a difficult question. I'd always liked reading even as a child. My father and mother were literate. They bought me books, encouraged reading. My mother encouraged me to learn poems to recite on school benches. I always did well in literature and language at school. I always liked languages, French and Latin. I love those languages, and English. I also studied maths and physics and chemistry, but I never did too well in those. But I never really wrote poetry in school. When I left school in 67, secondary school, I went to work in a bank for about 2 years. And I met a man called MacDonald Dixon, St. Lucia's leading poet of the time, and he's still one of our major poets. And he was a friend of the Walcott brothers, Derek and Roderick Walcott, and the Arts Guild Theatre Group, and the painters like Dunstan St. Omer. He knew the arts of the artists of the day. And through him, introduced me to the artists of that generation. I met somebody called Patricia Ismond, who became later a well-known Walcott scholar, and a Barbadian man called Stanley Reed. All these people were writers involved in the arts, and so on. A woman called Pat Joss, a white American woman who married St. Lucian, but she was very influential in the arts and culture of St. Lucian, influential in my own life. And through these people, I became more involved in literature, literary studies, studying of literature for A-level, which I did after I left school. And then I slowly but surely, somehow, I don't know how it happened, I began to write. I still have somewhere in an old exercise book the first things I wrote. And I began to write. Influenced by the people around me, I began to read Caribbean literature, became aware of Caribbean writers. And of course, Derek Walcott is from St. Lucia, his brother Roddy Walcott, the playwright, Garth St. Omer, the novelist. I see people like MacDonald Dixon and Pat Isman, and playwrights like Stanley French. St. Lucia was and is still very vibrant arts and culture country. We produced many major Caribbean writers. Then I went off to university at Cave Hill, Barbados, where I studied literature. And there I got very quickly involved with the arts and culture scene, the dramatist. I became a director, an actor, and so on in theater. Literature and theater became my loves, my religion, as it were. I wasn't part of religion in those days. I became very involved, and I met with like Kamau Brathwaite, Derek Walcott. I began to meet a lot of Caribbean writers, well-known names, George Lamming. And I slowly began to write. So as to why I began, it may have been, I think these things are gifts you have, latent gifts you have and potentialities within yourself, which are sparked and triggered off by the people you meet and the encouragement you get. I think that's what happened in my case. At university, as I studied literature and so on, began to meet people like that, I began more and more to write. I began to write my first poems there, and I began to write short stories too. I was very involved in theater, even from St. Lucia before I went to university, acting and directing. And then I began to write. As I say, at university, I really, as in my university years, I began to write, pay a lot of attention to my writing there. And when I left university, by 1975, I had my first chapbook out, which Pat Charles at the university office here in St. Lucia published for me called Vocation. Even then in those days, I wasn't even involved with Christianity and church yet, but the book was called Vocation. I could see the link very early between the arts and spirituality, as it were. And so that's how I began to write, and I continued over the years, and I published several books. My main publisher now is People Tree Press in the UK in Leeds, and I published 3 books, and I have 1 more book coming out with them next year. And so I've kept with it. I write poetry, short stories, reviews. I'm very involved in the literature scene. I curate a poetry portfolio called something called acalabash.com. And I'm very involved in the Caribbean literature scene. I'm recognized as a Caribbean writer. And I'm in touch with, I say older and contemporary Caribbean writers. I'm recognized as a Caribbean writer myself. So I guess that's how it started. I think the gift is there and is triggered off and is catalyzed by the people around you, the influences. But I think those things, any area of the arts, whether dancing, painting, music, I think it's a gift you have, a vocation, a calling. Deep, some people have a calling to science, or to mathematics, or those things. I think my callings have been to the arts, cultural things, and I think spirituality. And even as a child, people always tell my mother in Creole, "Ika vini a poet," he's going to become a priest. And I always kind of didn't like that. I used to kind of shy away when he said, but there must have been something about my personality, made people see something, quote unquote, priestly about me, something. But I always had an interest in the religious. And after I left school, I sort of left Catholicism, all that, and my religion was the arts. I loved the arts and so on. And I was a man of the world. I loved the things of, well, especially the arts and culture and media and so on, But in my late 20s, I became involved with Rastafari, man. I grew locks. I did everything Rastafarians did. I really enjoyed Rastafari. Because again, Obehi, Rastafari, after Black Power, and going back to the 30s and 40s, the days of Marcus Garvey, the Rastafari movement out of Jamaica was the first movement of my generation that called us as African diaspora people back to Africa, to recognize our African roots, our African heritage. As a young man in my 20s, a conscious young man, Black power, the arts and culture, the, if you want, our arts developing their own anti-colonial, post-colonial voices, the nation languages, in the music and the writing and so on. But when I encountered Rastafari, when I came back to St. Lucia, I'd been vaguely aware of them before at university. When I came back to St. Lucia, I discovered them. They had come to Rastafari movement, had got to St. Lucia. And they interested me because, again, I like their religious outlook on things. You will see young Rastafarians with their locks under trees praying and chanting psalms. And of course, they believed Haile Selassie was Christ incarnate, Christ returned. Eventually, I left Rastafari because I couldn't really accept that he was Christ. But I accepted their cultural, historical views, and they brought us back to a consciousness of Africa. And I was seeing things through non-colonial eyes. Stop seeing things with the eyes of the white man. You are not white, you're a black man, and your history is African. You come from Africa. See your culture, see your life through the eyes of your blackness, and appreciate your culture. Even though, yes, because of Caribbean people, we have European culture, we have Asian culture from India. But for us to identify as black people, and even for a place in the Caribbean, as Kamau Brath and others have shown, even though you have European culture, you have white Caribbean people, you have Asian Caribbean people. But Africa, the drum, even our Creole languages. For St. Lucia, Creole is French-based, but the African rhythms, the African words are there. The way we walk. If you come to St. Lucia Obehi, you would think you're in a marketplace in Nigeria. I'm sure I've never visited Africa. I need to do that. I'm sure if I come to Nigeria, Ghana, I will feel at home because I will see people looking like my people. I will hear the voices sound like my own Creole people, I'm sure. And so Rastafari did that for me. It awoke within me my own consciousness of my African culture. Even as I accepted, yes, the European heritage, my own Carib, Kalinago, through my great-grandmother, the first people's heritage. You can see it in my face. My mother looked very much like Carib, and I'm Amerindian. I think I look like my mother, so that's very much in my face, even though there's European and African too. And Rastafari did that for me. And I enjoyed walking with them, and I enjoyed their religiosity and so on. Eventually, I moved on from Rastafari because I had come back, if you want, reading the Bible again, to the biblical Christian faith. And I could not accept, as much as you may respect Haile Selassie, I certainly could not accept he was Christ incarnate. And so I parted company there with them, even as I respected and still respect their cultural, historical views and encouragement to Caribbean people to look to your heritage. Of course, people like Bob Marley were great influences. I discovered Bob Marley from my universities, and at home, Bob Marley's music, when I hear it, still moves me. And the roots reggae musicians of Jamaica, and Count Ozzy and Mystic Revelation of Rastafari and Ras Magnus, I still listen to this music. Because in a sense, what the Rastafari through their music does, in a sense, they give a kind of life to the Bible, to the biblical sound. Even to my Christian faith is helped by Rastafari interpretations of things. I don't see through their theological point of view. But in a sense, they have helped me to better make my Christianity more relevant to the world in which I live, as it were. You see? So my Christianity is not some American evangelist kind of thing, white American talking American accent, all this sort of crap, I need to make my biblical Christian faith relevant to the people among whom I live and speak to them in those terms. I think Rastafari helped me a lot with those things, even as I moved away from their theological viewpoint to which they are entitled. That's their view. So all these things, I think, fed into my own, if you want, philosophical, theological, cultural viewpoints, which fed into my writing my poetry. So I think that kind of sums up. I've said a lot of things there to you.
No, no, no,
I
perfectly
think kind of
fine.
sums up, how I rationalize it. Those are
Thank you so much for
influences,
that.
but out of all the influence, I've had to shape my own walking, my own view, my own rationalizing of these things. My own living. So for the many rastas, I get on well with many rastas. Many rastas would have no time for me because I'm a biblical Christian, because I believe in Jesus. You know what I'm saying? My Jesus is no white man. Jesus didn't come from Europe. He came from past, and he probably looked more like me than he looked like a white man. I don't worship no blonde haired, blue eyed, white skinned man. That's an in fact in my poetry you heard me read to you earlier on. I was talking about the death of the Queen. They create a counterfeit Christ. You know what Europe did? They create a counterfeit Christ, a white Christ, and they use and still use that to colonize our own people. And I reject all those. I reject all that. But neither will I, frankly. I don't worship a black Christ either. My faith is sort of beyond that. Because as the Apostle Paul said, I once knew Christ in the flesh, I no longer know him. And what Paul was saying there, Christ came to a particular part of the world, and he looked a particular way. But the Christ that Paul worshiped, for me as a Christian, Christ is God incarnate. And that is above race and skin. That's why Christianity is a religion for anybody, anywhere in the world, whether you're white, black, Indian, Asian, you can be a Christian. There's some
Thank you so
religions
much.
that are specific to our culture.
Thank you so much for that. The
Right.
question of religion and
Yes,
spirituality is also very hot here in this conversation.
I'm sure.
We can have an argument on that, and we will
Sure.
have enough time to really explore it.
Understood.
Thank
Understood.
you for pointing it out anyway.
Sure. No
Now,
problem.
there is something that actually touched me when you were explaining, responding to this question just now.
Mhm.
Um, so you listen to the message of Bob Marley,
Right. And,
to
and
the
those
message
musicians
of
of that generation, Bonnie Wheeler,
mhm, to
Jimmy,
the message of Marcus Garvey
of course.
and
Exactly.
many other at the time.
Yeah, the black leaders
All
and
right.
teachers.
Now there is a question for you.
Mhm.
Do you understand the message they were preaching at the time?
I would say yes. That's why
Now,
later I could pick and choose. I could say, okay, I hear what you've been saying. I follow you up to a point, but now I take my own steps in my own direction.
all right. Let me ask you a series of questions that you can
Sure.
choose how you want to respond to them.
Sure. Okay.
So you understand their message, correct?
Yes. I would say up to, yeah, as much as I've read and studied. I wouldn't say I have
Okay.
a total understanding because, but overall in a general way, yes.
Okay. So you said before that you have never been to Africa. Is
Mm.
that correct?
Yeah, I've never been to Africa, no.
Tell me why.
I don't know why, frankly. Um, I've been to the UK, I've been to the US, I've been to South America, to Caribbean islands. I've never been to India, Asia. I actually went to Japan many years ago. The job I had at the time, I was working in information services of my country, and I went to Japan on a communications thing. I don't know why I've never been to Africa. Maybe I have not put my mind enough on to say I will go. I'll plan to go and go. That's all I can say on that.
Mhm. This is very important for me
Sure.
because this podcast is dedicated to African diaspora, to African descent.
Wonderful. Yes.
At the point, I was interviewing a US professor on history.
Yes.
Then I told her, I said, listen, this is a safe place for us.
Hmm.
If we want to cry, we can cry. Why not? Let's talk about us.
Hmm.
I'm serious about it.
Hmm.
Now, how did you know about Africa? Now, I want to also put it in the series of questions in
Yes.
that you know that Africa is on this earth. This is where your ancestors are coming from.
Hmm.
Now, you have read probably books by the Europeans about Africa.
Hmm.
Now, have you tried to find out? Of course, I'm putting it to you, but
Yes.
actually,
Sure.
I'm putting it to African diaspora
Yes. Of course. Hmm.
in that what is stopping us from making the contact? Why are we not able to communicate with ourselves?
Hmm.
Why can't in Nigeria just take a flight and say, okay, I'm going to find out about the people living in the Caribbean?
Yes.
I don't need to learn about the people in the Caribbean through
Books.
uh, the benevolence of one European who wrote about them.
Right. Agreed. Mm-hmm.
Let me just take a flight to Jamaica.
Yes.
Let me go and find out. Let me know these people that were my brothers and my sisters.
Mm-hmm. For
Why
myself, yes.
can't the people in the Caribbean do the same?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we make the connection? This is the question.
Well, to answer that, I would say perhaps we have not got to the point of a deep enough interest of wanting to, because there are people from the Caribbean who have gone to Africa to live and so on, but not the majority of people. They would sooner go to the US, certainly, which is the popular place that a lot of Caribbean people go to. I think it's a question of the interest is not deep enough. Now, I think your question really is, why has there not been that deep an interest? And that's something I would need to think more about myself. Why has it not been that deep? Is it too far away? Even though you know you have deep ancestral connections with Africa, why have you not been interested in going to see for yourself instead of depending on CNN or whatever it is to see what Africa looks like? Or even to reading books. And over the years, I would have read different books now, about Africa, African history, and so on. But the question is, why have we not gone for the most part? I think we have not been interested enough. I think what's happening in the Caribbean, increasingly, more governments are making the effort to establish airline flights and to increase the contacts. And I think if those happen at an official level, people can say, oh, hold on, there's an airline, the Antigua, for example, have an Antiguan Airways flying to, I think, Ghana or Nigeria. And I think if those things start to happen more, people can say, hold on, there's an air flight from Antigua to Ghana. I think I'm going to go to Antigua from St. Lucia and go to Ghana for 2 or 3 weeks. And I think when those things become more available, I think that will help to wake up the interest in people to start thinking more Africa than they've done before. I think those things can help in a kind of way. That's part of our response.
But I can guarantee you that there are, okay, now, I was doing a research about my place of origin, which is Uromi in Edo State.
Yes. Is it Nigeria you're from?
That is Nigeria, yes.
Okay.
Then I found a document that was produced by a Russian.
Mm-hmm.
The guy is now in Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
So I contacted him. I said, hey, are you available to talk about this research that you have done?
Yes.
Of course, he told me he was no longer working on that at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You see, Russia do not have really that strong connection with Nigeria.
Yes.
Like the US or UK or France even, no?
Yes.
Okay, there are some connection, there are a lot of connection between Russia and a lot of Africans, no? I'm not saying there is no connection between Nigeria and Russia, but I'm saying like they have with UK and the rest.
Yes, of course.
But this individual, perhaps, maybe because he was working for a university or for his own curiosity, he decided to go as far as to my village, okay, to my town, to do a story about my people. Yes. Why are we not moved by this, say, curiosity?
Yes.
That we at least finally come to realize that we are from Africa.
Yes.
Or we have African brothers, if we are in Africa, that are living elsewhere. Why hasn't it come to our consciousness that we need to spend our money to undergo this trip to find out about the other half of me?
Yes.
Is it, what do we need to make it happen? It's not even because there is no direct flight. We can take a flight from, I don't know, from St. Lucia, come to Paris, from Paris, take a flight to Abidjan.
Yes.
Why is it difficult for us to do?
I don't think that it is that difficult. Is that maybe our consciousness, we have not turned and focused on doing that. We have not become interested enough for whatever reason in doing that. That's the best way I can rationalize it for now. We have not been interested enough. If you're interested enough in doing something, you will do it. Right? If I'm interested enough in going to New York, I say, I want to go to New York, I want to take a holiday to New York, then I will go. Or UK or wherever it might be. We have within us to develop an interest, an awakening within us. I need to be more interested in knowing and seeing the land of my ancestors. I think that's the best way I can explain it. You see, now as to why that interest is not there. I don't know. Maybe you can go back to deep colonialism effects, perhaps. I don't know. And I'm of a particular generation. But then, having said I'm a particular generation, are younger Caribbean people going to Africa in a way past my generation never even thought of going? I don't know. I'm not aware of that. There's a young woman I know who lives in Ghana. She made the choice to go there to live and to work and to study. And there have been older Caribbean people who always went there and did well in Africa. But it has not been a majority movement. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the best response I can give. The interest and the awakening of an interest has not been there. And perhaps your challenge can be, well, why don't you look at awakening an interest in going?
All right, yeah, that is the question. Yeah. How can we awaken that interest? Mm-hmm. Because this is what I found that happened based also of many people that I've interviewed, yeah, particularly those in the United States, mm-hmm, that what they know about Africa is through the European. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very dangerous.
Yes.
How can you know about, because if Africa, all the people in Africa have died, you cannot enter the land. That is why you are doing that. I can understand it. Mm. Even when I talk to professors of university, lecturers at university, yes, sometimes I do ask them, do you know that in Africa there are also university, what kind of collaboration is existing? Mm-hmm. So that you can exchange data, you can ask questions, you can go there on a trip, you can find out for yourself so that you can write from your point of view. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not only the African diaspora that are guilty of this, even the Africans themselves are guilty of this too. Mm-hmm. Now, let me give you an instance. Have you heard of how many African universities have sponsored expedition to study the ancient Egypt, ancient Nubia, for example, or even ancient Zimbabwe? Mm-hmm. I don't know of any. Maybe there are, but there are quite few. Mm-hmm. In that sometimes we neglect what belongs to us. Yes. We neglect to study who we are. Mm-hmm. Then we let it to be done by other people. By the Europeans. And then when we read the material, we say, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. Yes. But why can't I do it? Mm-hmm. And I'm living in Africa. Egypt is in Africa. You don't really need to go somewhere before you can study this history.
Yes.
This is the question. It's like I'm asking myself the question because I think this is what we need to do. We need to help ourselves. It's like we are drowning. Mm. We want somebody to come and save us, but we're not even participating in our own rescue.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. Agreed, yes. Mm-hmm.
What do we need to do?
What do we need to do? We have to find ways to wake ourselves up. Again, you go back to the Marcus Garveys and the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's and African leaders. When you go back to, Kwame Nkrumah and these people. And they were influential leaders because they woke people up. They made people become interested in their situation. And they called them to change their situations. And of course, you had the independence movements of the 50s and 60s and so on. So I think leadership is always very important. Just like when you talk about the Mali or the Rastafarians and so on. It is very often leaders like that, the Marcus Garveys, who help people to focus and stop and think about where they are and what they ought to be thinking about. And that leads movements, mass movements, even for a while, and these flows come. Something is achieved, then it probably dies out for a while until the next wave of leaders come to call people to another development of their own progress. Does that make some sense, perhaps?
Makes sense. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And because you are a literary expert, you're a writer, you're a poet, mm-hmm, I'm trying to understand it from you.
Yes.
What do you think is the role of literature in awakening, particularly the younger generation?
Yes.
Because today, 2022, we are living in a particular world
Mm-hmm.
in that we have opportunity that have become almost a curse. I'm talking of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Internet is a huge opportunity.
Yes.
But what do we do with this?
Precisely. And social media, correct? Twitter, all
So,
that, exactly.
how can literature be useful for us in reawakening us so that we can participate in our own rescue? Help me.
Again, we come back to the consciousness of the writers, those who are writing. We can't tell writers what to write, but we would hope in our own context of Africans, African diaspora, Caribbean, that there'd be writers writing, whether fiction, non-fiction, poetry, drama, who'd have among their themes just what you're talking about. Young African diaspora people, for example, a play, can you imagine a play, a couple young black people, men and women, and maybe among them one or two come to some awakening of Africa today, not just some romantic view of Africa in the past. And the play shows this young man or young woman reconnecting with Africa. And if the play is well written, well done, well performed, this could be a very look at what happened with the Wakanda thing. Yeah, very kind of romanticized and all the rest of it. Very popular, and we can have question marks about many things in it. But I saw it, and what it did, I think, to black people was somehow awaken something positive. Yeah, you may critique the Wakanda films and so on, but I think what it did was offer something, especially to young black people, which could be worked with, put it that way. But we don't need just the romanticized stuff. We need reality stuff. And therefore, writers, now, a connection. There's a man I know called Kwame Dawes, whom you might know, Jamaica. Well, born in Ghana, raised in Jamaica, lives all over the world, now lives in the States, and he's got a big name in the States as a writer. And he has created an African writers series, and he's working with new and upcoming writers, finding money to sponsor publication of their books. Here's a man who's dedicating his life alongside his own work, settled in Nebraska of all places, to somehow bringing the work of young African writers out to the diaspora and to the wider world, and somehow helping people in the West to know what's happening with African writing. But that's what writers can do, whether as an editor or publisher. As a writer, how does Africa and African peoples enter your work? In a positive sense, but also in a realistic sense. Because you don't want to sugarcoat things, you know? The Caribbean is a beautiful place, all the rest of it is no paradise. There's a lot of gun crimes increasing ever in the Caribbean, gun crime. Look at what's happening in Haiti. A lot of gangs are controlling Port-au-Prince and so on now. In St. Lucia, we have gun crime. Throughout the Caribbean now, gun crime is a serious thing. And a lot of politics in the Caribbean, there are a lot of people imitating Trump. So if you write about the Caribbean, you can't sugarcoat it. If you write about Africa, you can't sugarcoat it. You have to write the realistic what's happening there. But I think the best writers always give some glimmer of possibility. What is possible? What of hope? Because these are homes. How can we live there? How can we make these homes make sense? How can we move to positions of stability? How can we help in our own way? Even though you may sit in your study and write a book and put, you don't know who's reading the work. I don't know who's reading my work. But we have to hope that our writings find their way through to readers who can be influenced to do even more than we do in terms of reading. And I said, the internet, you're doing a podcast. and to be a podcast and use of the internet have strong literary affiliations. This is you to be me as a writer, but this is a literary kind of format in terms of we are chatting, we are talking about issues, and that's related to writing about the issues. So broadcast is very important in terms of that cultural, literary, social awareness development. I think we have to look to use the internet and social media more positively. There's a lot of negative stuff out there. This guy Elon Musk has just bought Twitter, and it's not already the hate speech has risen immediately on Twitter. How do we, as conscious Black people, use those means? I use Facebook, but I don't deal with all the negative stuff. I use it to promote literature and positive things. I have a Twitter about how to use Twitter myself. I use Facebook, of course. I use Gmail, and I have an author page my son manages for me. So writers have always had and will continue to have a big part to play in terms of speaking to our own people first and foremost. Before we write for the white man in New York, so I can have a bestseller on the New York Times and satisfy the need of white critics and so on, write for them. Who am I writing for? Who am I writing for? Very often I say, I don't even know who I'm writing for. I'm writing for whoever picks up my books to read them. But in writing, in my own eye and air, I'm writing for whoever will read. But the things I say are written for people who should be able to understand what I'm talking about. If I write about the Caribbean and the islands and the language I use, I talk about Rasta and I talk about this and that, they should know I'm speaking to them in our own shared language. A white man from England may be able to read and get some things, but my Caribbean people or even African diaspora should be able to read and pick up things out of what I write in a deeper sense, perhaps even the European, because I'm going to talk about my diaspora history and the history of colonialism and the effects. And maybe the white reader may not want to read about those things. So the writer has a big role and serious role to play, as writers have always done, whether James Baldwin in America, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Derek Walcott, Caribbean writers like Earl Lovelace, George Lamming. Question is, though, Obehi, who is reading what we write? Who is reading what we write? I don't know who's reading my work. I really do not know, frankly. I have not won any big awards. When you win awards or prizes, people go buy the book, whether or not they read it. I'm not in that league. So I don't know who's reading my work, but I put my work out. Who is reading? And are the people you would love to read your work, your own people, as it were, at home and abroad, are they reading and getting and hearing what you are saying to them as I'm writing? They don't have to agree, but are they at least listening and say, okay, I hear what he's saying. I agree with this. I don't agree with that, but at least I hear what the man is saying. I hear what the woman is saying. Or are writers following the present fads and fashions, many of which I will not mention now, because this is a public podcast. We can talk about that privately. But there are certain fads and fashions in arts and culture. And when you look at book lists now, or you look at prize and awards, who is getting them? People following certain trends. And very often you wonder whether certain writers are not writing to suit the trends because they know they'll get a big prize, they get an award, they get attention but if they're writing because that's what they really believe in, and that's an issue that they want to talk about, fine. I believe in democracy, it's a free country. You write whatever you want to write about. I will write whatever I want to write about. So leave me alone, I leave you alone.
Talking of who is reading your work, I think this is an important question.
Of course. Exactly.
Are the people really getting the message? Because if we spend all the time to write
and publishing it, putting it out,
publishing it, and maybe the people that we are targeting are not even concerned. They don't feel concerned about it. Because you see, it's like what we were saying before.
Yes.
We want to free ourselves.
Yes.
But how much effort are we putting in that? to really free ourselves, apart from the
Yes.
romanticizing of the story, no?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In that we are really the foot on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see people really reading the work?
Mm-hmm.
Are we lacking material to read, or do we have a lot of material? No people, we don't have enough readers.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't read now, you don't get the message that is being passed to
Exactly.
you. In Nigeria, it used to be said, if you want to hide something from Nigerians, put it in a book.
I've heard that.
I
I've
think
heard that. I've heard that. Yes.
it can quite generally be said of Africans.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
For
have to
black
say
people,
about that
for
as a
black people,
writer?
put it in the book. Yeah. But then you have to think of, especially today, other avenues to reach people. I often believe that film is a big area of the arts that can be used more. Books can become turned into films because you may have a bigger audience for films and film viewing than you have, and even with Netflix and so on, than you have for reading. Reading of books by Caribbean writers has always been an issue and a problem for Caribbean writers who are more quickly published in Britain, UK, US these days, and are read there and get prizes there than at home. I don't know what the situation is in Africa. Is it that writers have to somehow try to write the books, but use other forms, like audiobooks, which are popular, like films, TV films of their books, find other ways to communicate that are more popular, you see, where the people are. You often hear young people don't read. What I say, they're reading, but they're reading off the internet, they're reading of the social media, and they may not be reading the books. Why don't you go to UK or US and you travel on the train and everybody has a book reading? All the white people have a book reading, you know? I don't know about Africa and the Caribbean, you won't see that very often. People look at you funny if you stand in the bank line reading a book, you know? You're reading too much book, man, you know? Maybe we have to find other ways of communicating our message. Now you come to the Bob Marleys and the popular musicians and the African musicians, Fela Kuti and all the popular musicians and the Afrobeat these days. Bob Marley was popular. He didn't just create dance music. These musicians were popular because there was a serious message in them. And certainly Bob Marley and the roots rock reggae musicians had serious messages in their music. I'm sure Fela Kuti and those African musicians had serious messages. I don't know what messages are in the Afrobeat. Is it just entertainment, just sex, just almost softcore porn, like dancehall music in Jamaica, glorifying violence and whatever? What are the messages in today's popular music? I don't know. But certainly, music is a great avenue for putting out messages. And the conscious musicians of the past, and my generation grew up on the conscious music of the Kaizo, of the Calypso singers, of the reggae singers, you know, and those out of the states and so on, where people were not reading books, but they were listening to Bob Marley. And you enter a shop, I'm going to a bread shop one day, and an old lady is walking, dancing, and singing word for word a Bob Marley song. This is an older woman. So the literature they are reading, quote unquote, is the music of the lyrics. But the question is, what are the lyrics carrying today by our popular musicians, man? I like the Afrobeat, but I haven't listened enough to the lyrics. I hardly listen to Jamaican dancehall. I'm more a Bob Marley kind of generation person. I know the lyrics there. And from Trinidad, these days, a lot of music is glorifying gun violence, shooting of informers, and almost hardcore porn when I listen to what's being put out there. Now, to each his own, nobody can tell you what to listen to, what to dance to. But what's that doing to helping to create a conscious generation? But Obehi, it comes back, say even my generation, and I don't know how old you are, you probably are a younger generation than me. It's always, and if you go back to Marcus Garvey and so on, and maybe you go back to the Caribbean and slave plantations and revolts, it's always a minority of people who are serious about their revolt against the system of the day, which is oppressing people, corrupting people's minds. a minority of writers, singers, dancers, actors, filmmakers, thinkers, whoever it might be, women and men, workers, who take it upon themselves as their personal philosophy and vocation to do the work no matter who goes with them. I almost use the word prophetic, to give a prophetic edge to what they're doing. And no matter if they get arrested or beaten up or mocked at or whatever, but that minority plants seeds and encourages young ones and finds ways to put the work out. And eventually that work, the seeds are planted. Like the Rastafarian generation, Rastafari were persecuted and jailed and their locks cut. Today, wherever you go, everybody has locks these days. And the essential Rastafari message is probably forgotten about us being as African diaspora. But they did achieve something, even though they went through times of great persecution and trouble. Marcus Garvey faced arrest and deportation from America. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X. I'm sure a lot of your African leaders, who were assassinated and killed, Lumumba. So it's a minority of people who have dedicated themselves to this task of bringing people to consciousness. And you not get a prize or awards today for your writing your books. You know who's reading your books? But some young woman or young man will pick up a book and say, wow. And years later, you don't know, you may have died and gone, but they become a voice that will lead a generation out of darkness into light. I think that's the hope. You see, I've been a teacher for many years. And you often say you teach a class and you don't know who's listening in the class. And so you're planting seeds. You're planting seeds. You are watering the ground. But a student in your class can turn out to be a Derek Walker, an Arthur Lewis, a Kwame Nkrumah, a Lumumba, a Marcus Garvey. And so we who are teachers are aware of this matter of planting seeds and watering seeds. So the most we can do, Obehi, is do the work. This work you're doing with your podcast, whatever work you're doing with it, you keep doing it as long as you can. Because you're planting seeds, watering seeds, and you don't know who's listening, who's watching. But you have to have faith that whatever little we are doing, as unrecognized as it might be, even as mocked and scoffed as you may be in your own community, you persist. You must have that faith. Prophet is not without honor, except in his own country. You see? So we persist. That's what I would say.
What would be your final thought to conclude the conversation? Your final thoughts.
Okay, my final thoughts. Well, thanks for doing this with me. It was unexpected. Thanks to my good friend Ron Williams who put me on to you. He's a good friend, very encouraging. He's been reading my work and giving me some good critical comments. We persist. We continue. You give me something to think about. This interest in the real Africa. Do I need myself to awaken in myself, even at my age and my stage, some interest in the continent of Africa? And how do I do that? And how can I stay faithful to this calling, this vocation of being a writer in my country? And how my writing can go even beyond my country into the wider world, of whatever race, not only African diaspora and people who look like me, but other European. In fact, my work is well known in England and I guess in America too. But try to be honest to the work we do. Try to be honest in what we do. Try not to compromise our principles. Try not to be unkind, ungracious. We can disagree without being disrespectful. But try to hold our principles, hold our positions. And take it a day at a time and keep working. Just keep doing whatever given to do. But these days we never know what tomorrow will bring, We just never know what tomorrow will bring. But while we're here, we do the work. And that's what I would say. So thanks for this interview and this chat, man. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewanfo. Thank you so much for listening and talk to you in the next episode.